Hey guys, my name is Dr. Film, and yes, I'm qualified to be a biker. Before we begin, you should know that this review will contain no spoilers. And if you're new to the channel, please subscribe for reviews and more. And you are more than welcome to follow me on TikTok for more fun videos and content. And so, without further ado, let us begin reviewing the Bikeriders. Yeah, let's go! Let's just move on.
Cast, cinematography, and editing.
Now let's talk about the main focus of this movie, Benny, Johnny, and Kathy, played by Austin Butler, Tom Hardy, and Jodie Comer. And they were honestly well casted in this movie. They gave solid performances and their characters were memorable and surprisingly complex, especially the leader of the biker club, Johnny. Even though Tom Hardy is known for giving raw emotional performances, his performance in this movie was actually very subtle. I mean, look at this scene for instance. Just from his expression alone, you would know immediately that there's more to this guy than meets the eye. Oh, and as for Austin Butler and Jodie Comer, they honestly have good chemistry and their characters were quite engaging. And you also gotta give the filmmakers props for the feel and look of this movie. It honestly felt like we took a back step in time to the 1960s. And man, when you see the bikers riding their motorcycles and such, you can feel the engines of those motorcycles. I mean, wow, they sound so good. And it's all thanks to the editing and cinematography. Although I have to confess, there are at times where the editing does a poor job keeping the story on track, particularly the time passage of this movie. I mean, hey, I wouldn't mind it that much, except the film doesn't really establish how long it's been since the Bikers Club began. How much time has passed? 2 months? 3 months? A year? 2 years? Come on, man, give us the details! Tell me! In short, my friends, the editing makes the story feel disjointed at times. And speaking of story, let's move on to our next category. Woo!
The story.
Now for those who don't know, the story is based on a book written by Danny Lyon. And yes, despite how the movie was edited, I thought the story in this film was well thought out. The pacing was good, it does well establishing our characters, their motivations, and it does well depicting the rise and fall of the Bikers Club. But the problem with this story is that it mainly focused on the relationship between Benny and Kathy more so than the rise and fall of the Bikers Club. I mean, don't get me wrong, we see how the club started. We see the bikers interacting with each other and such, and we see them struggling, and during the midpoint, we see them turning into something we don't recognize anymore. But as soon as we get to the final act, near the end of the story, I felt little to no impact, because the movie mostly focused on the love story between Benny and Kathy. Although, to be fair, you gotta give the writers props for not making the story over the top or too silly. I mean, hey, if this movie turned out much more differently than what we have here now, I bet the movie would be something like this.
I don't want you riding.
Oh, no, no, no.
Overall, my friends, this movie is not what I expected. But I mean that in a very good way. Everything about this movie is pretty spectacular. From the castings, the performances, the sound design, the cinematography, and a surprisingly well cohesive narrative. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying this was the greatest movie I've ever seen. Like most films, it's got some issues here and there, and let's be real here, this movie isn't exactly the Iron Claw, that's for sure. But you have to give the filmmakers and the crew props for what they did with this movie. And quite honestly, I'm glad that this movie wasn't your typical zany, over-the-top, action-filled movie as we usually see in theaters nowadays. This was a nice change of pace, and I hope others will check this film out, including you.
What, who, me?
With all that said, I give the Bikeriders an 8.5 out of 10. Woo! That's the end of my review. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a like. And please, follow me on Instagram at Dr. Film Ronces for updates on my channel. And as always, I will see you guys at our next appointment.